Bam! MC is in the house. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I am here every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time, taking a topic, deep diving, having a good time while doing it, and got a pretty good show planned today. Show, stream. What do we call this? A video? I don't know. I got some stuff to go over, and I think you guys will get a kick out of it. So before we do that, let me just get you guys on mission. If you guys are not getting my emails, you can go to masterchimletter.com and do that. The link is in the description below. Also, you men out there who have been getting value out of my content, almost everything that I do is based around this concept of alignment. And that concept gets applied to a much bigger ecosystem of beliefs and philosophies. But for the most part, if you guys are not aligned, you should know it. And in the description, you'll see a link to my leadership alignment assessment. It's free, takes about 3 minutes, and you should do it. Once you do it, you'll get a completely personalized report sent to you. I spent a lot of time on the logic of the quiz and how the results are going to be interpreted and the feedback that you guys get. And I'm pretty impressed with the final result. And I've gotten a lot of good feedback from the guys that have taken it. So if you guys have not taken it, and listen, you ladies out there, you want to take it, by all means, you're allowed to take it too. Obviously, all of my coaching systems and services and groups and et cetera, they cater to men. But where this assessment is concerned, you ladies will actually get a benefit from it too. So I don't want you to think I'm completely excluding you from everything. But you guys out there, like why you would not take it, I don't know. It is very, very useful, I would say. All right. So who do we got going on? Jesse, what's going on, brother man? Good to see you. And we got Jamie, what's up, my man, up in Canada? And the missus, Aaron, what's up? She says, I just accidentally called you Master Chim, and it was so wouldn't be the first time. It wouldn't be the first time. One of my black belts, Anthony, I remember years ago meeting his mom, and he must have been talking about, Master Chim, my martial arts instructor, etc., for a while. And she walks into school and she looks at me and she goes, "This is Master Chim?" She goes, "I thought you were going to be Chinese." So, not exactly. So it gets worse than Mr. Chim, right? But all right, let's get it moving here. So I did have a few moments to preempt the list I'm going to go over today. And obviously the name of the talk is the top 10 ways men destroy their power. And I've gone through a bunch of different iterations of how exactly to present this. And I'm pretty happy with the list that I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down a countdown. I'm going to start with number 10. And now the premise of this list, remember, is men have rituals, habits that erode the same power those rituals and habits are usually designed to improve upon. So they're trying to get stronger and are losing strength in the process, in other words. When I talk about power, and, in today's list, I've tried my best not to have this be the case, but there's going to be some terminology, and I'll add context to it, but there's a lot of language that I have in my pressure to power philosophy that is specific to the way I use it, but I'll add context when appropriate. But for the most part, when I say power, which is kind of something that, this entire talk is built around, there's internal power and external power. Internal power is self-power. Self-power is the ability for an individual to maintain the integrity of who he is despite the growing stressors around him, right? Think of like a tier 1 military operator. There's chaos going everywhere, and he is focused and on mission. That would be an example of self-power at play. The external power, which is the second power, is the real power, I call it, right? So the self-power, real power. Real power is the ability for an individual to make the world respond. So this is an actual external outcome generating force that is what I call real power. So you have the internal power and external power. So when I say top 10 ways that men destroy their power, it is one of those that I'm referring to. And I will tell you that in all the conversations that I've had with men over the years, even though they think their definition of power is different, after a little bit of discussion, they realize we're talking about the same thing. So whatever your take on it is, just take my word for it. It means what I think it means, right? So what do we got? Johnny Groove. What's up, brother man? Good to see you. All right, so let's get into it. And this is the list of the top 10 ways men destroy their power. And let's get to number 10. Bam. Number 10. They confuse busyness with momentum. And I've spoken about this at length before. There's a difference between, in my inner circle, my mastermind group for entrepreneurs, there's just a difference between busyness and business, right? And even though there's probably some relation in the words, how they developed, what I'm trying to make a distinction for is you at the end of the day feeling really, really fatigued and tired as if you did some shit. But when you actually look at, the list of what you've done, there ain't shit there. We want to create momentum. Momentum is that sort of sustained directional movement toward our mission, toward the pursuit of whatever outcomes we're trying to generate. This is something that some men have trouble with because although they do make themselves fatigued and they could say at the end of the day they're tired, and maybe even they put in a full day's worth of work, it was different work toward different missions. And when it comes to the one specific mission, that if you were to ask them what they're trying to accomplish, and they actually, they told you, and then you actually audited, their activities to see how much of it was on that mission, you'll see that, and this is most men, I would say, I would argue at this point, most men, it's just sporadic bursts of focus, sporadic bursts of effort and movement that is exactly overlapped with mission, right? So number 10, how men destroy their power. They're busy, but they're not investing their effort towards their mission in any way that creates momentum, right? Hope that makes sense. And as usual, guys, I have like a bunch of stuff open here, so give me a second if I'm seeming like I'm blanking out. I'm not, I promise you. Let's get to number 9. Number 9, they fail to remove the friction points that ruin their flow. That was an awkward reading. So, friction points. Friction is the resistance of reality pushing back against an individual and his movement. Friction is something that tests the structure of who you are. This is where we're going to start getting, and I don't want to get into too much terminology, but friction is the thing that's trying to sabotage what it is that you're doing, right? Imagine walking on a path, and then imagine walking in a neck-high pool of water. Then imagine walking through that pool of water now turned into, I don't know, honey or something, right? I'm increasing the friction. I'm not increasing who you are. I'm not modifying who you are. I'm not modifying the direction you're going, but the resistance, the external resistance is increasing. And this is one of the things that I see a lot of men fuck up. They have a bunch of friction points and they refuse to remove them, right? So when I say ruin their flow, it's really that flow of force towards mission, right? That momentum. The person who's going from one end of the pool to the other, right? They have an exertion amount of energy they're trying to turn into movement, and friction is obstructing that. Well, people have friction in their lives, and these frictions are external. It's maybe, place that they live compared to where they work. It might be the fact that they take the bus to work instead of the train. It might be they spend too much time with their friends because their friends require more time than this person should be investing in friends. Like there could be all of these external factors that can go, and there's different subsets of friction I'm not going to get into, but in general, friction. And when it comes to our list today, the reason why men destroy their power is because they fail to remove the friction that they identify, right? And these friction points are identifiable. And once they're identifiable, they're adjustable, they're removable, and sometimes it's a guy that has a terrible wife, or a guy that has a hobby that's just destroying the rest of his life, and whatever it is, these things are identifiable, they're removable. And this particular number 9 speaks to those men that fail to remove them and how that destroys the power that they've built, right? So let's get into number 8. The number 8 reason or 8 way that men destroy their power. They undermine trust from the people who depend on them. So in a tribe, we need to be trusted to be who we claim to be who our allies, our tribal brothers and sisters have expected us to be. They've built the alliance on who that version of us is. And when we undermine it, we sabotage one of the primary force multipliers an individual has. If your people do not have your back, you've got a problem. And when we undermine trust from the people that depend on us, we sabotage our ability to generate power. Sometimes too, when an individual, I don't want to get off too off the beaten path here, but when an individual doesn't see a consequence right off the bat, sometimes he tends to minimize the significance of some of the problems or some of the mistakes that he's making, the bad habits that he's installing. And I see this particular example as being one of the more common ones with men. They start just not showing up for their people. They start giving their people reasons to think that we're not who we say we are, and ultimately, it's hard for us to calculate sometimes what we're going to lose in the short term. But even more difficult is understanding when we undermine the trust of the people around us, what that winds up sabotaging or taking away from us in the future, right? And this particular way, number 8 addresses that. So let's get into number 7. Number 7, they lose credibility in their own mission. There's a point where if a man's not being consistent, if a man is not proving to himself that he could do something, there's so much empty sort of bandwidth that could be filled with stories of self-sabotage, right? If you guys have ever seen my identity frame, it's part of the self-power system. One of the 3 components of the identity is the storyteller. And that storyteller is going to tell us a story that makes us higher state and more focused, or lower state and less focused. When a man isn't consistent, it's hard for them to see the mission that they're on clearly, because it's being sort of muddied with all this other feedback and information that they're exposing themselves to. Mission is the only clear path to connect a vision that you're trying to get to, right? So we have that vision out there. The mission is that path from here to there. When we're on the mission, everything is clear. And it's clear as observed by what we do from day to day, right? If you're saying you want to run a marathon and I look at, the last 7 days of your activities, and there's no marathon running rituals, whether it's running or, getting your body in shape, whatever the totality of the rituals are to run a marathon, I wouldn't know. Whatever they are, I should be able to see that. So what happens is, and I've seen this, maybe a better example that I should put out there is fighters. I've seen people about to get into the cage, and there's always a little bit of nerves, obviously, and to different extents. The pros, it's easier to deal with than the amateurs and whatnot. But there have been times where even the pros, they're nervous before they get in. And they're nervous before they get in the cage because they know they could have prepared a little bit more. They could have, who knows what they didn't tell me that they were doing when they shouldn't have been doing, hanging out, partying, doing what people tend to do. And all of that rears its head in their uncertainty right before they're about to get into the cage. And so when you look at, the collection of activities, the collection of rituals that a man has during the course of a day, the more on mission those activities are, or at least compatible to mission, the more credibility and belief they'll have in their own mission, right? And that's what number 7 addresses. So let's get to number 6. Where are you? Number 6, they collapse the moment friction appears. So weak men melt when it gets hot, right? It's an analogy or metaphor that I've used before. Well, if we want to be a little bit more analytical, a little bit more formulaic, we could say that weak systems collapse in the face of resistance. Friction is, as I explained before, it's the external resistance to what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Friction is the water in the pool that we're trying to walk through. It's going to expose how much a guy wants it, right? So I use the term will, right? And, when we're talking about an individual's will, it's really, I guess commonly described as how bad do you really want it? And you could talk about how bad you really want it, but you really want to be able to see somebody, show you how much they want it. And when you have a weak system, sometimes that resistance is enough, that friction in the form of resistance is enough to undermine the will, to eventually sabotage the output of your efforts. You could be really enthusiastic about it, and you could have a good system to do it even. But if the friction is high enough, it's going to undermine just how committed you are to achieving what it is you're trying to achieve. But if your will or your system is less ideal, is dysfunctionally low, if you don't really want it, and or you got a bad system that you're using to get it, a little bit of resistance and you're done. Right. And that's what some men just don't, they don't have the wherewithal to even look to see why these things aren't happening the way they are. So oftentimes men are not used to sort of analyzing why things are going wrong. They're much more comfortable and much more adept at creating the stories that rationalize why these things are happening. Ultimately, these stories that are created usually absolve them of any accountability. But the thing about being vulnerable to friction is it's your system and it's your willpower, right? There's your will and then the power of the will, right? So the willpower. You have your system and your willpower. I've used before as an example of assessing the value of a martial arts system. You got to have a curriculum. Your people have to train in that curriculum. And when they fight, they have to use that curriculum and win against somebody who's untrained. But if you have a curriculum and you practice that curriculum in training, and when you fight, you use that curriculum and you still lose, not a one-off, numbers being larger to see the trends, and you still lose to untrained people, your system literally makes you a worse fighter, right? So there's a point where we want to have that, well, if this and this, then this sort of relationship and dynamic. And where this is concerned, what we're talking about today, you have your willpower and you have the system you're using. You could be really enthusiastic about a terrible martial art. And as soon as you go to fight, if you lose every single time, something's got to give, right? And sometimes, you have a great system and you're not about it. You're not committed, and that needs to be identified, right? And sometimes the acknowledgement is enough to sort of snap you out of it and get you back on track. Obviously, sometimes we've diagnosed an issue. Now we need to do the work to sort of recover, and get back on mission. But number 6, they collapse the moment friction appears. Aaron asks, would you say that makes them just suck or make them more unreasonably retarded once the fight starts, not training enough? Well, you could be, in the jungle gym, whenever somebody's practicing something in a drill format and they're, not focusing on the context of what it is they're doing, or they're, just diddly-daddly and looking around and everything. And I go to correct them. I say, every bad rep makes you better at being bad. So if you have a bad fighting system, you're going to be better at fighting badly, right? If that makes sense. So sometimes you could be really good at a bad system and it doesn't produce the output because the system isn't a good system for that output. But you're really good at complying to the system. This is where the rule followers, unravel, right? This is the big problem that they have. When I talk about rule followers, and if you guys remember my Mind Killers program years ago, the vacuum cleaner, archetype, where they need absolute certainty and control, and there is no absolute certainty and control in life. So the people whose identities require that, they just shrink their life to something that is manageable, but it's also unnatural and it's a subset of reality, and in bad situations, they'll be the head in the sand, and sometimes they'll be the person that just stays focused on what they have to do, which is a good thing because they're not very distractible. But chance forbid you ever need them to pivot, adjust, or be creative, they don't have that ability because those things reside outside of the perfect little box that they've made for themselves, right? So I hope that makes sense. So we were on 6. Let's keep it moving. We got number 5. They only move when they feel strong. So this is something that I think, on its face, it sort of makes sense. And I'll say if I were going to use it a little bit more formulaically with how I would describe it and break it down, this is the man that uses emotion for motion, right? He's the guy that he has to be fired up in order to do the thing he's supposed to do. Something I would often do in the martial arts classes when I'm teaching my students, fighters, is I would either train with no music, which some people laugh because like old school wrestlers and even martial artists from other systems, what do you mean music? But in the jiu-jitsu MMA world, everybody's got to have the playlist, right? And that's the thing. So I would train, without music. I would sometimes put on music that would be the exact opposite type of music that you would expect during martial arts training. I'd put on like Sade or something, right? Something that it's like, can we put on something with a little bit more energy? And it's like, no, because I don't want you to train and associate this music with the energy you get to do what you're supposed to do. And even, when it comes to fighting, you shouldn't fight because you're angry. You should fight because it's your job. In whatever applications that, it being your job would take, protector of your family or whatever. Well, you have the people who make the mistake, the men who make this mistake, illustrated by number 5. They don't understand that will is something that happens internally. If they supplement or flat out replace their will with some external source of energy, then they're never going to be in charge of the trajectory of their own life. And I think that when you understand that you need to be motivated internally, you realize that you should never spend a second, and maybe you don't wind up ever spending a second, a moment, waiting for something to inspire you, right? So if you look at the root, the etymology of the word inspire, inspiration, it's connected to the idea of breathing, right? Breathing energy or breathing life, respiration, inspiration. And if you need to be inspired by something external, you are literally waiting for something to breathe life into you so you could move. And it's a lot of things, but a good plan ain't one of them, right? So that's number 5. Let's get to number 4. And this is the number 4 reason, or the number 4 way that men destroy their power. They have no structure to carry their will. Now we're getting into a little bit more of the pressure to power philosophy terminology, but it's worth fleshing out. If I was going to be honest on this list, I had to stay true to the stuff that I'm talking, with my mastermind and coaching guys, all the time. So they have no structure to carry their will. Without structure, the system, remember the structure is like the rituals, it's the habits, it's the thing that the guy does every day to allow him to think he could generate an outcome. When we're motivated through the force of will, that will needs to go somewhere. If you're somebody who says, you know what, I'm tired of not knowing how to fight, I'm going to go and train martial arts. And either you can't reach the martial art place because you don't have means of transportation. You don't have the money to pay for classes because your financial situation isn't strong enough to do that. You can't even practice the moves because your body is so fragile and frail that it would need a sort of a chapter or a stage of priming first before you exposed it to the actual training. Meaning you need to train to be able to train. All of those scenarios represent a deficient level of structure. So to say in number 4, they have no structure to carry their will, they could get fired up and motivated and pulled towards wanting to create an outcome, but they haven't developed the infrastructure to be able to support that movement. And that's one of the ways that people sabotage their power. Men destroy their power. They don't think about these things. They don't think about, I should be healthy in case I want to do something that my body has to do. I should make money in case I need to do something that requires money. I should have a crew of friends in case I find myself in a situation where I need some support. And I could just think of hypotheticals to continue to illustrate the point. But the fact is, your structure is going to be what carries you to do anything. It's like if you're somebody who, I have a lot of friends, male friends, who don't have wives and kids. Some have kids and no wives, but let's just say somebody is not, I'm not going to have kids. That's fine. I know that, my mother and father took care of my grandmother last few years of her life, my paternal grandmother. I also know that if she didn't have my mother and father, she'd have been in a rough way. I know plenty, even my mother now, who's in her 70s. One of the things that I know that keeps her moving forward is spending time with her grandkids. Maybe me and my brother too, but her grandkids, it's something that lights up her life. Well, that is a commentary on the structure that she designed. And so she's able to do things because she has that structure. She needs a ride to the airport. My nephew, my brother's son, usually drives her. Right? She needs to get picked up. My niece picks her up. Like, there is a structure that really just amounts to power that she experiences. But she's the one that created that structure. So this is how, these variables play against one another. All right, so that was number 4. Aaron writes, speaking of unreasonable fighting, people that got to get drunk to get the courage to fight, right? What they call liquid courage. And it's really, we should understand what the duty is. What is the compelling aspect of our integrity, our reputation, however we want to frame it. Like, there should be a why if we're going to fight. And that why should not be reduced to making you feel better. Sometimes people that, I made a meme a couple of years ago where it was called Respect the Axe. And the observation I made was sometimes men, when they're younger, they grab their axe too early and too often. But as they get older, they don't grab it early or often enough. And there is a point where men will become conflict averse as time goes on. But that's not to say that some men never develop a relationship with conflict to begin with. And I just don't mean violence, by the way. Conflict could be an argument. You get into a bad argument with a coworker, people could say, we got into a fight. We fought over this whole thing, but it doesn't denote, physical violence necessarily. But that type of conflict, engagement, being able to build a relationship with it starts with understanding the context of it. It's like, why am I going to have this fight? Why am I going to have this argument? If you look at, I've said before, there is a time where a parent should tell their child, because I said so. And it's when you tell your child to do something, ask your child to do something, and they ask why, you have to be able to discern what why it is, right? So sometimes it's the why of actual legitimate curiosity. They want to know why this is. They don't understand, and it might be worth an explanation. You want to add context where you can. It's part of, raising a child. But then there are those whys that reflect something else. It's the pushback in the only way they know how to your authority. Almost like it's the complaining without full on, rejecting, what was being said. Throw out the garbage. Why? You got to throw it out now. Throw it out before you go to bed. Why do I have to throw it out before? And then it's like, all right, we're not having a discussion on the mysteries of throwing out garbage, right? It's he doesn't want to, so it's because I said so. And now it's like, this is an authority thing now, instead of a reminder thing as it was before, right? So there's always this context. But if you have an individual who doesn't understand how to navigate conflict, they're always going to find a way to skirt around what they should be doing. A very typical thing with mothers is they don't want to hurt their kids' feelings. They don't want to make their kid uncomfortable. They don't want, so it's like they will sugarcoat something. They'll do it themselves instead of forcing the kid to do it, and it's really something that they need to sort out, because if you have a job to do, you should do your job, right? And how doing your job makes you feel should really be led by the job, not by the feelings, right? So where are we at? Hopefully that answers that. All right, we're up to number 3. All right, this is the number 3 way that men destroy their own power. They violate their own standards and erode their identity. So every man has a collection of personal laws. Personal laws are those non-negotiable standards that a man understands has to be abided by. Because if he doesn't, he understands there's going to be a consequence. So a personal law shouldn't be conflated with a preference. A personal law is, I know, like for me, pressure to power. Strength always wins. Movement is mandatory. Tribe matters. Like all these different sayings that I have could fall into the category of my individual personal laws. Now, I also feel that these laws apply to everybody, but these are the ones that I hold at the forefront of my awareness because I think it gives me the most benefit to stay aware of them. So that's just a quick thing on personal laws. Every time a man breaks his personal laws, it sabotages his self power because he is confusing himself as to who he actually is. It instigates or accelerates the erosion of an identity. Identities need to be replenished constantly. That's why movement is mandatory, right? The friction of life keeps us in the game, keeps us alive, makes us know we're moving. But if we get to the point where we start breaking our own laws, our own personal laws, it starts to undermine that replenishment of the relationship we have with ourselves. It starts making being ourself and acting like ourself a little bit more complicated, a little bit more inconsistent. And when your behavior contradicts those standards that you've espoused to represent, that's when that erosion is at its highest. So, number 3, they violate their own standards and erode identity. This is how a man's power gets destroyed. He undermines the relationship he has with himself. It's like, who do you claim to be? If you claim to be an archetype of an individual and your entire life is built around the projection of that identity to the alliances that you build, but then you act in a way that conflicts or undermines that, how could you say you are who you are? And obviously, it's just the domino effect after that of, well, people are going to start realizing that more and more, undermining their investment in you. Next thing you know, not only do you have a misunderstanding of who you are to yourself, but the support system that you've generated starts to erode also, right? So that was number 3. I got some comments here. Faithful Tribe. Thank you, brother or sister. Appreciate it. Aaron writes, it reminds me how Elfwin says, oh, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to do school. And I'm like, yo, if you went to public, you'd be there for 6 to 8 hours, not just a couple. Sorry if that makes no sense, but I feel it fit in there for a second. However, I'm also half distracted with it. No, it does make sense. There's a point where people not understanding the outcomes of their actions sometimes will just use a sort of decision process that is really centered around comfort and convenience. And who is the most notorious example of that? Children, right? They're the ones. What do you want for dinner? Ice cream. What do you want for dessert? More ice cream. So that's something that some adults don't even square away, even though they mask it in different sort of applications. The concept's the same. All right, so we are on number 2. So this is the number 2 way they mistake inconsistency. Oh, I'm fucking reading it. Right? This is the number 2 way men destroy their power. Hit the button, Justin. There you go. Number 2, they make inconsistency. They mistake inconsistency for a skills problem. And this is another one of those things that you'll get. I remember throw my son under the bus. One of them. I won't say which one it is, right? So I won't embarrass him too much. But I remember teaching him how to ride a bike. And just the nature of the circumstances of the way we live. My property is on a hill. My kids are homeschooled. When we're traveling, it's usually to train and, in the Bronx and, like loading up the car with the bikes and going to the park. It's a pain in the fucking ass, to be honest. And it's not like we're not doing anything, right? I think I should lead with that. But all that being said, it led to one of my sons not learning how to ride his bike until he was like, I want to say 10 maybe, 11 even, something like that. But I remember teaching him, and it was frustrating because when you learn to ride a bike, you fall a lot, right? So he was not about that. And it got to the point where he said, I'm never going to do this. And it was this conclusion that he came to, completely illegitimate conclusion. But he thought, like, some people are just bike riders and some people aren't. He thought it was a skill issue. He thought it like, I'm not good enough for this. And to me, it's like walking or learning a language or, anything. I tell people when they're learning jujitsu, the two secrets to get good at martial arts: pay your bill and train. Like, that's it. Yeah, but how come some people get better than other people? Well, sometimes there's a little bit of leeway here and there, but a lot of times it's just the individual. Some, like, you go to what's considered the best jiu-jitsu school in the world, I guarantee you there's going to be a whole collection of people that fucking suck. You go to the worst jiu-jitsu school in the world, if it's big enough, you're going to find one or two killers. It's just the way it goes. So for an individual in this particular, way here, number two, to dismiss the loss of power as a skill issue is to reject accountability. It's to say, well, I'm just not made for this. It's not what I'm supposed to do. I remember in wrestling and in judo, I was very good at an ankle pick, right? Not even a regular ankle pick like a Cale Sanderson ankle pick, but a cross ankle pick. Nobody bothered to tell me that when you're built like a Minecraft character, you're not supposed to do that move. Because I remember hearing that move taught and having it described as, this is a move that's really good for guys with long arms. I'm like, and in my head, I'm like, or guys that never heard that and just keep practicing it until they get good at it. And I got good at it. For some reason, I wasn't supposed to get good at it. Now, obviously, that's not true. But on the surface level, that's what many people may think. And I can't tell you how many times, an individual just dismisses his ability to do something just because he didn't do it long enough. He didn't stay in the game. Like if you have somebody who's, 4'5" and they want to dunk a basketball, it's like, all right, there might just not be an ability for you to do that. But I think everybody, if there's a skill issue, all of it's undone. If it's possible at all, it has a number. And that number represents the iterations that a person spends trying to get better at the thing. So a lot of men, they'll sabotage their ability to generate power because they dismiss their ability to develop something just because they haven't spent enough time. I know people who have gotten their first promotion in jiu-jitsu, which in jiu-jitsu, it's a blue belt. And I think I got my blue belt in 6 months. It might be something like that. I had a student who didn't get his first promotion until almost 2 years. And the motherfucker was training. But he was all fucking flavors of fucking terrible when he showed up. And he just had to do the work. It's not somebody who had any physical ability inherently, never played sports, didn't have any physical strength, used to get ragdolled by the women. This is a grown-ass man, or mostly grown, like, it's like, what was your mother pregnant for like 3 months? Somebody took you out of the oven too early. But whatever the case was, he kept training. And I remember when he got to the point where he was submitting people, they used to submit him with that. Now, he didn't submit them all the time. We're not talking about a world beater here. We're talking about somebody who, had he quit, never would have seen the skill level that he developed that surprised everybody. So hope that makes sense. All right. Jamie writes, I think the angry dad at the end of that Pink Floyd song, if you don't eat your meat, how can you have any pudding, is the good guy. feed one kid just pudding and the other just meat, see what happens. Well, I think, the utopian sort of bohemian outlook of many artists, explains away a lot of the narratives we see in a lot of that stuff. But I agree. I think of, the application of training somebody for a fight. It's one of those things when you talk about violence, it's one of those things where these things sort themselves out. And it's like, do you want to train with the trainer? It's like you're going to fight somebody in 6 months and it's a professional fighter or it's somebody who's very formidable. And you have two trainers you can go to. One of them that you're going to probably hate, but is going to drive you as hard as you could possibly be driven. And the other one is going to make sure that you're safe, comfortable, and he doesn't hurt your feelings. I think some people will take the soft master. And I think those people have vaginas. Figuratively speaking, right? Because I think when you try to just simplify it in an extreme scenario like that, everyone's like, well, of course you have to be pushed and driven. It's just that everybody has a point where suddenly they're like, no, but that's too much, and I have formulas for that, like, did the guy stop getting better? Did he stop moving? Then it's not too much. Too much pressure, right? There's terminology for this I have, but it's the thing that stops the person from pursuing it anymore. Like it throws them off the road, right? And that's one of the things that a lot of soft people don't really build a relationship with, right? So, what else? Is there another comment? Fat Ralph. Fat Ralph. He says, I was always told I wouldn't be able to do a job saying Nagi to Fat Nagi. So Fat Ralph used to train with me, and he's still fat as fuck. Fucking Ralph. Lose some fucking weight. Jesus Christ. But you're right. Ralph trained with me for a couple of years, and he'll tell you that I don't really sugarcoat much. That was definitely an example of it. All right, let's get to the last one. What do we got here? This is the number one way that men destroy their power. Before we do that, let's go to rundown. Let's get the rundown of the list so far. So number 10 we have, they confuse busyness with momentum. Number 9, they fail to remove the friction points that ruin their flow. 8, they undermine trust from the people who depend on them. 7, they lose credibility in their own mission. 6, they collapse the moment friction appears. 5, they only move when they feel strong. Number 4, they have no structure to carry their will. Number 3, they violate their own standards and erode identity. Number 2, they mistake inconsistency for a skills problem. And the number one way that men destroy their power, they refuse to reset when the structure is broken. Nobody is perfect. I literally, on this morning's mastermind call, I have my inner circle with the entrepreneurs on Wednesday mornings. And I told one of the guys, the best or the first step to a great plan is a terrible plan, right? So long as you're moving, right? You got to move. The first one's supposed to be the worst one. The last one's supposed to be the best one so far. The implication is that we continue to move. There's a point where a man just needs to reset. A man has compromised the integrity of his 3 roads, his ability to pursue mission in any way that is fulfilling and create momentum as a result has been completely destroyed. And he needs to do something about it. A reset is a sort of intentional, deliberate return back to my 3 roads model, road 1. You have to start with you. You have to build you. You have to start creating the structures that are going to improve your self-power, improve your real power. The alignment needs to be built from there as a progression. It's not my life is falling apart, I need to make a lot of money. Because you'll be a miserable motherfucker with a lot of money. Sometimes the worst things to give bad habits is a bigger budget. So sometimes that completely goes the opposite way, makes a bad situation worse. How can you make a bad situation worse? Well, look at a lot of the people that grew up without a decent head on their shoulders, who became professional athletes or professional entertainers, and at some point got a big check. And they had a lot of problems before they got that big check. Then I got the big check, and their problems, compounded exponentially because they gave bad habits a bigger budget. There's a point where we just got to return to that first road. If men don't eventually reset, they wind up just repeating the same thing over and over again. But every single time they repeat it, it becomes a little bit less than the one before, a little bit less power, a little bit of a smaller world, a little bit of a more vulnerable ecosystem around them, a little less intentional, supportive allies. So how do we stop that cycle? We just get back to road one and we say, I'm going to build me. I'm going to focus on what it is I should be doing. There's plenty of ways you could do that, obviously. Plenty of ways that I have for you to do that, obviously. But this is the one that really undermines people. They think that, they're not supposed to start over. They're not supposed to reset. They think that something's actually lost, when they acknowledge outwardly that, okay, this is fucked up, I got to start over again. And they're embarrassed maybe, or maybe it's just depressing because it's a constant reminder to them that they failed, and it's just a wrong paradigm to have. It's got to start with you. One of my favorite Alan Watts quotes is, you shouldn't take yourself seriously, but you should always take yourself sincerely. And if you really want to be the strongest person you could be, let that mean something to you, and let that meaning be reflected in how you act. And sometimes the action is saying, I got to start over again. Right? So this number one way, they refuse to reset when the structure is broken. All right. So that was the list of the top 10 ways men destroy their power. I'm pretty happy with the way that wound up. Guys, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Share the video with your friends. If you guys have not taken, I can't stress this enough, if you have not taken the leadership alignment assessment, the link's in the description. It's 3 minutes. Go take the damn thing. It's free. I'm not selling your email address. I don't do any of that bullshit, right? I'll send you some emails. I'll send you a follow-up personalized report. Everything will be awesome. Especially if you guys have ever gotten anything out of what I do, like, this is the thing you should be doing. Take it to the next level. All right, guys, I appreciate you. I'll see you guys next week. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.